Well, thanks for coming, everyone. Welcome to our panel. I've grandly titled this The Digital Disruptors, and I've chosen all of the panel to come here today myself personally. They weren't selected by anyone else because I think that they're all very busy disrupting things in the digital sphere, which is a very good thing. And at the FT, where I work now on the website, that's certainly what we're looking to do, because we can sense that if we don't do it first, then our rivals certainly will and take our audience share and stories with them. So I'm going to briefly introduce everyone to you and ask each person a couple of questions in turn, just so that you are aware of the differences in the types of magazines and websites and other things that they work for, and so that you can start to be forming in your head an idea of some of the questions that you'd like to ask them later on. When we've been through the whole panel, I'll ask a couple of other things, and then I'm quite relaxed. If somebody wants to ask a question at any point, just put your hand up. That's what these events are for. It's not formal, it's informal, and we're very, very grateful again to Elizabeth Taggy at Edelman for hosting. It's such a lovely environment. If you want to get up and get a drink halfway through, that's fine by me. So I will start off with the woman nearest to me, who's Nicola Harrison from Retail Week, which I'm sure many of you know and get. I'm signed up to their emails. Nicola has a new job title, don't you? You're head of content now, which we were laughing about.
Yes, yeah. I suppose that's the way things are going now.
What does it mean?
So it means I'm responsible for basically any piece of content, news, analysis, video, online and in the magazine and across the app.
And in terms of Retail Week's business model, your subscribers, if they subscribe to the magazine, they get the website and vice versa, or can they just get the website now on its own?
They can just get the digital subscription, and you can't just get the magazine. So you have to get the digital side.
That's interesting. And what's your your universe now in terms of subscribers?
So we're about 8,500, and our model at the moment is corporate subscriptions, so going to John Lewis, who are based just down the road, and saying, do you want to spend X amount of money, and we'll give you, 100 logons for retailweek.com, and we'll chuck 10 or 15 magazines in while we're at it. So that's kind of our model at the moment.
And how are your audience is basically retailers, it's also the service communities around that, estate agents, shop fitters, people who want to get work from retailers, recruitment, all the rest of it. How are you serving that audience with what you're doing online now, as opposed to just recreating the magazine online, which is what you were doing until a few years ago?
Yeah, that's right. So 3 years ago, we didn't really have an online strategy. Now we do, and it seems to be working, but still quite a large proportion of our readers, sadly, don't visit us online, which is why we still have the magazine, and for the foreseeable, it's not going anywhere. Until that balance dramatically shifts and everyone's on retailweek.com, then we might reconsider the part of the magazine plays. But we do heaps more content now than we ever used to online. 70% of the content Retail Week produces is online only.
Wow, that's high.
So the vast majority of what we do won't fit in the mag. That's purely because of space, but also obviously video. So yeah, that's increased dramatically, and we're certainly writing for online now rather than writing for the mag and putting things online.
Afterwards?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's switched now.
Interesting. I'm seeing a few kind of nods from people in the room about this being the way that things have turned around. At the FT, we call it digital first, which is something I often shout out when I'm waiting for 3 hours for a print editor to edit my online stories, to remind them of the fact that they have in fact committed to do this. So moving on to Mark. Now, Mark Wilding is, you are the editor now
yes.
of the Dalstonist. How many people in the room live in Hackney? Good. That's a pleasing smattering. How many people in the room want to live in Hackney? Because you should, because it's great. Mark left Property Week, where I used to work with another colleague of ours, Nick Johnstone, and they set up the Dalstonist. And I can remember taking a phone call from somebody at Property Week who was kind of slightly perturbed that these two very talented, appreciated people had gone off to start some kind of listings magazine about East London. And there was, a sense of, what are they doing? You know, leaving this great trade magazine to go off into the wilds of Hackney. But you've done incredibly well. You have a magazine which is a listings magazine which comes out monthly, I believe, quarterly, and that's supplemented by not only a website but also a massive presence on social media, talking about, well, you tell us.
It's mostly about pop-up bars, actually. Yeah, the idea is to kind of have a local news service aimed at 18 to 35-year-olds. So there are local papers who cover Hackney, but
they're for the pensioners.
Exactly. They sort of cover sort of bin collections.
People who like reading about murder.
Exactly. Yeah. So we don't tend to do hard news or cover crime or anything like that. So I guess you could call it a good news publication. But
your kind of archetypal Dalstonist story is this restaurant that's been here for 20 years is closing down, and this new restaurant that serves like raw food or hipster fare is opening up, which is why I asked Mark along, because I know a listings magazine, you might be thinking, what on earth has that got to do with the built environment? But as a built environment journalist or an ex-built environment journalist, I actually really enjoy reading about what you're reporting on, both as a consumer in Hackney and as somebody who's interested in regeneration.
Yeah, I think actually it's been interesting that a lot of the most popular stories that we write are found through the methods that you'd use as a property journalist, and just going through the weekly list of planning applications. And if anyone's opening a bar or a restaurant, they have to put in a licensing or planning application. And the number of times that you call up and they say, how did you know about this? Because no one else is sort of spending their days trawling through Hackney Council's sort of planning database. But yeah, you can find a lot of good stories that way.
It's great, and you get good images as well, because they have to submit their images with their planning application.
And they're very popular built environment stories.
Tell us about your business model a bit, and how you make it all work.
We're not so much digital first as the digital and print operations.
It's integrated.
They're really very separate things, and so what goes on the website doesn't go into the magazine. What goes in the magazine does go online eventually, but it's nowhere near the most popular things that we write about online.
So in the magazine you're covering more interviews and analysis, and in the website and on social media it's more of a news flow of stuff that's happening day by day.
The really popular news stories tend to be 4 or 5 paragraphs in length. You just sort of knock them out quickly and post ideally 2 or 3 just quick stories a day, and the magazine provides that space for sort of longer form stories. They might be more like 1,500 words. Very different things, but I think they play to the strengths of each format. And
tell me about the role of social media in your strategy, because I would say for you, compared to the rest of the panel, social media is really the thing that sets you apart. How many followers do you have on Facebook and Twitter and stuff?
I think Facebook is about 12,500 now, and growing, and Twitter is about 10,000. Twitter for some reason has proved a little bit harder to gain traction, but I guess some of these things just take time. So I think across all networks it's about 25,000, and it's really important. It's we've grown those organically since the start, but that's basically where all our traffic comes from. Facebook is by far the biggest source of traffic, and so it's been really useful sort of getting the content out there, and the stories that really take off are the ones that people share on their Facebook feeds. There is a downside in that when Facebook changes its algorithm or decides it's going to sort of mess around with sort of which stories it prioritises, that can have a real impact on traffic levels.
Yes,
and that has happened.
I'm finding I'm getting less of your stories in my feed, which I'm not happy about, but all we can do is complain to Facebook, or make sure we look on your website. Well, we'll come back to some of those points in a group situation shortly, particularly how much traffic, where the traffic is coming from, because it ain't coming from home pages in newspaper land, that's for sure. So moving on to Amanda. Now, many of you will know Amanda because she used to edit Building Design, which was the wonderful, celebrated newspaper of the architectural world, which ironically is now a website. But Amanda doesn't work there anymore. She has taken herself off back more into the folds of architecture, and last year, or was it the year before, set up Archiboo. Tell us what Archiboo is, for those of us who don't know or haven't been to an event.
Okay, so do you all know TED Talks? Yeah, okay, so the easiest way to explain Archiboo is it's TED Talks for architects with very good coffee. So that's a kind of brief explanation. Really, it's talks for architects in the morning, 8 o'clock till 9:30. The reason I chose the morning slot is because architects are time poor. It's very, very difficult to get an architect to go anywhere or do anything. If you ever tried that as a PR or trying to get them to speak, they're always busy. So I reckoned that was the good slot to go for. And I try to use architecturally interesting venues if I can. Architects' offices often, but I don't pay for them. They're obviously quite delighted to have me there. So they put on a nice breakfast quite often. And then the sort of the idea of it is to give architects access to the kinds of people that surprisingly they don't often speak to because they're so busy designing buildings and being architects. So technologists, journalists, communicators, clients. I mean, obviously they do speak to clients, but they always want to speak to them, to different kinds of clients. Disruptors. So, for example, on Thursday morning, I've got somebody talking about a new architecture school that they've set up, which has got a very, very different model to the standard architecture school model, that it doesn't have a premises. And I also run something called the Architect Pitch, where architects get to pitch in front of clients for 3 minutes, and then they get feedback from the clients on the panel. And the difference, I suppose, between what I do and the New London Architecture, if people have been to events there, is that apart from being very quick and in the mornings and quite cheap to come to, they're all uploaded to the web, and that was a very, very important part of what I wanted to do. I didn't want to create a London sort of clubby, architecty, Clerkenwell thing because there's quite a lot of that. I wanted to have all the talks on the website, so you create a sort of archive of ideas that anybody anywhere in the world can listen to and watch.
Would the next kind of logical step of that be doing like a live webcast so that you can have people interacting with you from further afield, or would that make it too complicated?
Yeah, I think the thing is simplicity. I mean, if you're a kind of startup and there's only you and you haven't gone and raised millions of pounds, and that I do everything. I mean, I don't do the filming, but I look after the website, probably like Mark, and get the speakers, and I have a lot of help from Cara Communications. I can see is in the room, and so I don't do absolutely everything, but I mean anything that gets complicated, particularly involving sort of technology. Not that I'm not a big fan of technology, but webcasting probably, unless somebody would like to pay for it, is a few years away.
You have a very big following on Twitter. I
personally do.
Tell us how many followers you have. Go on.
Well, it's not huge, about 11,500.
That's pretty good.
Archiboo has about 1,300. So, I mean, I was going to say that I think it's very difficult if you're starting a brand from scratch and you have quite a profile in the industry to expect that you're going to get that, with the brand as well, because people always prefer to communicate with you as the person rather than Archiboo. I mean, they know it's me, but it's different, and I think that goes for all kind of websites. All Twitter. That on Twitter you're much better being a person.
Noted. I think everyone's written that one down or typed it into their iPads. I have to say, you're the only one with an iPad. I'm sitting here with paper and pen. You've got a moleskin, so you're one off on me. the rest of you are without notes. With your events, how did you decide that there was this need to kind of like find people online and then bring them together? Tell us a bit about the process.
Well, I suppose, I mean, I've worked in architecture and been on BD, and before that, you know, worked on magazines and written about architecture for a long time. So I know what architects have a lot of, which is talks by other architects. So that's what they do. Naturally, they go off and listen to their friends talk about buildings. And I suppose that so I didn't want to do that, but I also looked around and, you know, there's MIPIM, which is hugely popular with architects now. And the kind of networking thing, this idea that, you know, you are listening to somebody really interesting, but you are meeting people, and it's amazing, even the groups that I'm sort of getting, sort of 30, 40, 45, 50 people, the kind of contacts that people are making, not just between each other, but also with the client who's standing up there. I mean, it is quite, if I was actually getting a cut of the jobs that the architects have got from meeting the client in one of my events, I would be a lot wealthier than I am at the moment. But that's not my model. But I think this idea of networking is really something quite powerful, and actually maybe we've sort of lost a bit of the art of that because everybody's so busy and they all link in with each other and think all that stuff counts. Well, LinkedIn is a great way of finding somebody's email or sort of saying, can I email you? But it's rubbish at actually, you know, having a good, decent conversation. As in, I think all those kind of platforms, they just don't give that levels of engagement which a live, real event does, even at 8:30 in the morning.
And what I think is interesting is what you've created with Archiboo. Certainly the trade magazines are looking to recreate that community, you know, in online space or in events. And, you know, to a greater extent, newspapers are trying to do it too. I mean, look at the Guardian's, you know, enormous adverts for, you know, come and be a member.
The Guardian Masterclass, I guess. I mean, I am getting into sort of doing a few of those sort of more tailored events for people who want to. I mean, I'm doing one in a couple of weeks' time on publishing. So architects who want to publish, which most of them do, because they all think they're geniuses. And so we've got a book publisher, a graphic designer, and a digital publisher, and it will be a sort of a bit like I am ripping off the masterclass model, really.
Why not?
Why not?
That's what the internet's about, doing things better, cheaper, faster. Now, you have been in a magazine environment for the first half of your career at least. You've been used to, you know, print deadlines, you've been used to doing online stories every day as it's demanded, but at CoStar you don't have any actual print product.
None at all, no.
How did that feel, making the transition?
It was quite liberating. I mean, it evolved. I had some ideas about how I thought it would work, and then it sort of naturally evolved then. And the great thing was we had two things really that did that. Was one, with online you can see immediately who's reading what. So as soon as that bulletin started going out, we could start adjusting quickly to what our particular audience was actually interested in.
And what are the big themes that get the most clicks? M&A, deals, people moves?
Yeah, I mean, just within the context of the things we noticed, I mean, when we launched it, we were in the teeth of the crisis, and it was very much, I was lucky to get a guy join who's a brilliant finance writer called James Wallace, and between the two of us we kind of cooked up. We had a good 3-month period where we could work out how we wanted to go about things, and the initial stories that were having a lot of impact were all around the banks and the NPL issues, and we were lucky to break a few of those and get hold of a few of those. And we discovered that people wanted, bizarrely, almost separately to perhaps what Mark was saying, they wanted a lot of depth on and in the online story. They didn't sort of want to wait until the weekend or whenever to get that. They wanted to come to a story about these things that explored that in some detail. And the other thing they wanted was, if there was a big M&A story, they wanted that interview with John Forrester or whoever was the man at the helm that day, rather than have to wait. So you knew if you could get hold of him and get it done for 3 o'clock on the bulletin that day, a lot of people would go for it, and want to see that. So I think that was a liberating side of it. You knew, well, we don't have to hold anything back at all. Let's get as much as we can on what is clearly the story of the day, and provide that information now. Yeah.
Now, I'm going to ask everyone about emails in a second, but your model is very much I'm not a CoStar subscriber, but I'm allowed to sign up to your morning email. I just can't click through on any of the things, but normally your headline writers are quite good, so I can work out what's going on.
Yes.
But you send out an email in the morning, in the afternoon.
Is the actual daily email is around about 3 o'clock. That's when it goes. Very conscious decision there. EGIs goes out 4. Property Weeks was going out about 1 o'clock-ish, so it was sort of place ourselves in the middle. We felt, obviously as the two obvious competitors, that it would give us a little bit more time to have done those things I was saying, but we needed to be out before EGIs came out. And not that much design work has gone into the home page itself. It's gone into the email and how it looks. Basically, it's just 3 stories at the top. They're the best 3. Get the paragraph. You get into.
What are your click-through rates like? What's a good story in terms of clicks?
You get close to 10,000 for today, Cushman and DTZ. But you're going to get that. That's so then you could if you could update it a bit by the time the bulletin goes out 3, we'd have done a breaking news flash in the morning, and then we'd managed to speak to Brett White by the afternoon. That can lift it again when it goes out at the top of the bulletin. A sensational story like that for our industry will do that well. And
that's about the kind of the apex that you can aim at. But in terms of stories that break through, that you were perhaps surprised that they did as well as they did, tell us about one of those.
What some of the initial ones that surprised us was what we found was, I think most journalists or people in the industry, something is happening, a trend, a light bulb goes off in your head and you think, you sit down in your Monday meeting and you go, there's a hell of a lot of shopping centres coming to market. What's that all about? Let's try and add it all up, talk to a few people. And what we found was it probably was happening in all the newsrooms at exactly the same time, so let's do it on the Monday. And so, when we thought of it as much as possible. And so a lot of those roundup stories, kind of the great city sell-off, I remember, was one of the great £4 billion city sell-off was one of the first ones we did like that, where it went absolutely bananas, and we'd had, it's just people coming back into it and using it as a kind of research of what's on the market, what's out there. So that was a surprise, I think, was that those kind of more cumulatively put together pieces with lots of information were actually really, obviously with a headline that people thought that's going to work for me.
As a news editor at the FT, you're constantly being told by specialists, but we know that. We knew that this was happening, and you constantly had to say to them, most ordinary people who aren't like, an energy specialist or a housing specialist don't know this, and if you can say to them, like you say, this is the £4 billion sell-off happening in the City of London, and somebody who's not a property specialist is actually going to take up and read that story and think, this is telling me about the world outside my
And the good thing about it was a lot of people would appreciate it, but then you'd see people go, there's not 6, there's 10. What are you talking about? But the great thing was they were beginning to sort of see you as having an agenda there, and that people were talking about. So that had a big impact from relatively early on.
Key word there, I think, data. I mean, data journalism. I was talking to some people at the drinks before the event started, and this is, I know we've got some students from City University in the room tonight somewhere. Data journalism is like the big buzzword in newsrooms all across the country. People want to tell stories with data, they want to do interactive, they want to do charts. We had a brilliant thing on the FT website a few months ago about elevators in buildings. We got a lift firm to tell us how quickly it took elevators in like the Empire State Building and the Shard and all of these new skyscrapers in London to go up and down, because the one in the Empire State Building is notoriously slow, and then we had like the really whizzy one that they put in the Leadenhall building going up and down like a jack in the box. And it was just like, if you had an interactive graphic with all of this moving on it, it suddenly made 100,000 people read a story about lift speeds, which I don't think, you know, even if you had the best headline writer in the world, wouldn't have been possible. But that again was all from, you know, clever use of data. So how is Retail Week using data? I should mention we've got Sir Matthew of Hopkinson in the room, the local data company expert, who's given both of us many stories, I think, over the terms of our careers, aggregating data about the high streets and how vacant they were and how full they are now becoming, full of discount shops and thrift stores.
Yeah.
So how is that kind of panning out for Retail Week?
Yeah, we're approaching it differently than we used to. So we'd get data from the local data company, and then we might write a story about it, and it would be, you know, vacancy rates up 12% and a quote from Matthew, and then that would be it. But now we want to take the data and turn it into infographics, which people can absorb much more easily online, and critically it's much better on your mobile as well. So we've quite a lot of emphasis at Retail Week on mobile at the moment, because we think that's where it's all going.
Can you tell how many people are reading your stories or clicking on your news emails on mobile?
I know what percentage of traffic is coming from mobile, and it's not as high as we want it to be. It's like low double digits.
Because I think that's the difference where newspapers are really moving ahead. I mean, they like to use this phrase of mobile devices, so it takes in smartphones and tablets. But I mean, certainly by the time I start work on ft.com at about 7 in the morning, nearly 90% of our traffic is mobile or iPad, and that's at the kind of peak viewing period because the markets are about to open. And then later on in the evening, after the kind of kids have gone to bedtime, the iPad traffic really picks up. And then in the middle of the day, you've got the aldescos, as they're known, people who are on their desktop computers eating a sandwich, looking at the headlines. And we do know that, and kind of have tried to shift our news day around publishing content on our website at a time when people are going to be reading it with an eye to, you know, what they're after on their devices. So what are your readers kind of liking on the mobile?
Well, just in terms of the working day, we restructured our day as well. So we used to put out a newsletter about 10:30 in the morning. That's been shifted to 9 a.m. and that's still not early enough because retail bosses really annoyingly like to get up really early. So they're being driven, usually, our readers, to their first meeting between 6 and 7, and our newsletter's going out at 9. So we feel like we've missed this massive window of opportunity. So very soon we're going to shift it another hour and a half earlier to 7:30.
Wow. Is that going to be your job? Are you going to start getting up at 5:30 like I do?
Thankfully, I don't have to do that anymore. But yeah, if I was on the news desk still, certainly.
Wow.
So that's quite a big cultural change for a news desk. We've also combined news and features. I shouldn't even call it news anymore. We have a content team now, hence my ridiculously lofty sounding job. Because we don't think people think about reading news or features, they're just reading something that they're interested in. So all our reporters are writing news and analysis pieces, usually for online, which then, like I said, gets put into the mag. In terms of mobile, infographics and video, actually, it's an interesting story. Mike Coop, the boss of Sainsbury's, probably wouldn't appreciate me saying this. So maybe
walk
don't
like an
tweet
Egyptian.
Yes. A year ago, before the Egypt thing emerged, he basically said he really cherishes Retail Week on a Friday. And we were like, well, what about online? Didn't you go on the website? We're doing all this great stuff. And he was like, nah, it's not interested. I've not got time, which we get quite a lot because our readers are chief execs and they don't have time.
But they've got time to flick through a magazine.
Yeah, that's usually at the weekend.
I see.
Over a coffee. See?
Okay.
Anyway, a year later, we asked him again, and now he's raving about all the video we're doing. He's watching it all on his mobile, and he's basically skipped the desktop. So he's gone from magazine to mobile, and he doesn't interact with us at all on desktop, which I think is quite interesting. So I think mobile's really good video's really good on mobile, and short, punchy stories. Long form stuff we're not so sure about yet. Probably tablet more than mobile, like smartphone.
Although people will read long stories on their mobile phones if it compels them enough to
Yeah, so we're trying to encourage
on.
people by doing things like bullet points at the start of the story, but that's hard to measure whether that's working or not unless you can do an online survey there and then do you like bullet points, which we're not doing.
We
so
have this really evil piece of software that will say 50% of readers did not read beyond this point, and it will be like the first 50 words. And so I always think when I'm filing stories now, like, don't bother crafting paragraph 8. You know, just sort of like just publish it and then fiddle around with it later.
That's good to know, though. So obviously we see that on videos. We can see dwell time on particular videos. Which are working and which aren't, and we're trialing lots of different things, like really short 60 seconds, we're calling them shortcuts, on say the history of the loyalty card. One of our reporters will just speak for 60 seconds into the camera, and then we're doing like 8 minutes, we're trying to get it down, longer pieces of me and my editor,
the talking heads,
just talking about the week and providing analysis, and people seem to like that at the moment, but we are trying to get it down to about 5 or 6 minutes. Even that feels too long.
If people are watching it, then
they're not necessarily
that's good.
Watching to the end.
We've also done a 60-second thing in the FT newsroom, and you can. It's really horrible because they film it in the newsroom, and you'll be like standing up with a bacon sandwich or something, an Ed Miliband moment, and then you realise that there's a camera pointing at you, so you go away and sit down, so you're out of the line of vision. But they are incredibly popular because it's a low time commitment. Another scary thing that the FT has started doing, I don't know if anyone has noticed on our website. I noticed, but I didn't know what it was for about a week. Next to a news story, it will say 3 minutes or 2 minutes next to the timestamp of what time it was published, because that's how long the average person will take to read it. And this is like a big factor with click-through. People will look at a headline, and if they can see it only takes 1 minute to read the story, then more of them will click on it.
I think that's really interesting. I think like we should tell you that at Retail Week, because if you've got a 5-minute gap between your next meeting, and you know this analysis piece is going to take you 5 minutes to read, then you might read it to fill that gap almost.
It's really, I just wouldn't have thought of it, because I don't think about articles and reading in terms of minutes, but then maybe, you know, we're not retail chief executives, so maybe our time is not as valuable. Well, some interesting points there in terms of news and features kind of being merged together. I mean, on newspapers, we've got this concept of the outside story on the front page and the inside story, which is kind of, you know, going into the, you know, with a softer top, those kinds of themes. But I mean, for you, Mark, and Paul, you don't. Certainly in the online space for the Dawsonists, you know, you don't have a distinction between news and features either. You're just doing articles which you can then either expand later on or leave short if you think that they're not worthy of more colour. Yeah,
I think it's good to have that flexibility and just approach each story as, you know, as you think. Do it in the form that you think works for, whatever the subject is. So, you know, we don't really differentiate between doing a quick news story, which, as I said before, might be 4 or 5 paragraphs, or if if it warrants 1,500 words, we'll do it in the magazine. We'll publish a feature. We might also do a Q&A if it's a news story that kind of warrants digging a bit deeper into it. As Paul was saying, sometimes people do want a bit more information about it, and those Q&A formats I think work quite well online. So
yes,
it's the website is basically a blog. We use WordPress. The
it's very chatty.
Yeah, and I think it's informal, but we sort of just treat each story as there's not a standard format. We'll do sort of whatever we want, really.
And you get lots of shares, you've mentioned, on social media, and you also get lots of comments. I mean, a lot of your comments, to be fair, are people tagging the name of a friend who lives in Hackney or something because they've read about it and they want them to notice it on Facebook. But it's a really interesting way that people are sharing things. How are people sharing your content online, Nicola and Paul, and to an extent Amanda, although it's more video content with you?
Yeah, all our articles that we publish are tweeted automatically.
On a dumb feed.
Yeah. mainly because of the volume, but we're looking at that now because we think Retweet could inject a bit more personality into its Twitter feed. So we are looking at the journalists taking it on themselves a bit more.
Well, on the New York Times, you have to file your article and 3 tweets.
Oh dear, that's interesting.
Apparently.
The Huffington Post CMS system has an inbuilt Twitter section, so you can just push the tweet within the CMS.
I do think it's good for reporters to be thinking about the tweets that best describe their story, because let's face it, if you're writing a story as a journalist, you often get asked to put a rough headline on it, because it just helps the headline writer if they can know what the writer thinks is the most important thing. And that goes again for the tweet, which is probably the same number of characters. But do you find that tweets do better when they've got pictures in?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, pictures and interesting quotes rather than just broadcasting a headline. If you can pull out a quote from within it and then tag the link on the end and say something amusing or interesting, then I find that usually helps.
And you obviously have a plethora of planning images which you're able to tweet out. I remember the one you did a while ago of those awful towers in Bishopsgate and what they were going to look like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, images definitely help. I think interesting what you were saying about journalists having to write a tweet. Though. I mean, I think you should obviously be able to sell your story in 140 characters.
Or less.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
If you're going to use an image, it kind of affects
a link in there and an image, yeah, exactly. But also, I think there is a trend in headline writing as well that, I think I've noticed Bloomberg doing it recently, which is more matter of fact, just saying what the story is, and I think that lends itself to Twitter as well, just explaining what people are going to read. Some
rich real estate guys in America have bought some other rich real estate guys for your Cushman story earlier. How about CoStar when it comes to tweets and images, and because you're kind of a bit more paywall protected?
Exactly. Yes, we are. We don't really have we don't really use Facebook. We use Twitter. I mean, I use Twitter all the time to find out what's going on, but that's another story. But kind of use it to the best stories to get them out there and show our. It's a bit like a sort of cat marking down the territory with Twitter, isn't it? Get it out there first and say, here we were there first. And and it's only amongst a small community of journalists. No one else cares, do they? But it's just the way it is. But really, the main way people engage with us, has to be said, is the email, or if.
How do you get kind of like feedback from readers? They can comment on stories online, but the ones that I've been able to see, the free ones, don't tend to get all that many comments. It's not a criticism, it's just an observation.
We don't have any commentary online. It's just you just see how many people have clicked. So immediately you just go into the system, right? It's going rocketing up the amount of readers, and then it's going out and meeting people, and they say to you, we like it or we don't, or people email us a lot about things and.
What suggesting that you should write about them, or that they say, we like what you wrote about that story, you should consider writing about some other issue, or is it more kind of congratulatory, like, good story, we like?
It's all of it. It's all of those things, to be honest with you. But we don't have a letters page or anything like that.
We don't have a page.
Looking for some wood to touch. We've never really. And I don't know if this is a result of being online only, but we've never had any real legal troubles. There we are. There is some. We've had the odd person get upset with us, but I remember when I was on magazines, it was a kind of uncomfortable moment once a week where someone would saber-rattling, and I wonder if because the online is so able to change immediately in response to issues that there's less of an issue there as well. That certainly makes the job a lot more comforting.
Journalists in the room, be careful about making changes rapidly online, because it can actually go against you in a court case if you concede and change something, because it's you're admitting that it's your fault and that you've got something wrong. Always check with your lawyer first before doing anything. It's my top tip.
Good advice.
and a lot of the time, the lawyer will say no. Don't, if they're a good lawyer. Don't just be careful about making too many changes. Amanda, your videos, as you were saying, you get lots of international viewers who are coming onto your site, and presumably you know that because they write things to you.
Well, I know it because I can see the stats. I mean, you can go into Vimeo and see where where they all are, and it's quite interesting that you've got people watching them in countries where you wouldn't think they'd be very interested in what Paul Finch has got to say about MIPIM. But, in Kurdistan they are. There's, you have 25 watches. So that's just an eye-opener for me. I never expected that.
I'm sure it would be for him.
Well, yeah. And I guess, that's the great thing about all this transparency, about knowing who's reading you, what does well, what videos do well, what bit of content does well. If you send out newsletters, as I do, you can see your click-throughs, your open rates. I mean, it's fascinating coming from an environment where somebody did that for you in a big magazine. That's sort of obviously way over there in another bit of the building.
Well, they'd have those sticker surveys. I just about remember those, where people would go through and put a sticker on the page of the magazine that they...
But even when you're online, it was very difficult always to find out what stories did well until we sort of incorporated it in on the news desk. But I mean, I think that's sort of changed a bit how everybody approaches content, because you obviously want to give people what they like reading. So, for example, architects seem to like stories about 10 things you should know about social media, or 10 ways to write a blog. I mean, anything starting with 10 is always popular.
Yeah, or 5, or 3.
Or 5, yeah.
We always get told not 10 because it looks a bit artificial. Like you've given numbers,
yeah.
so we always go for 7 or
5,
or
yeah.
4.
Or any. It's people. I think it goes back to what you were saying about the time, that they know that there's only so many points they've got to get through, rather than a huge long screed about how to, write a perfect tweet.
The BuzzFeedication of the built environment press. Well, we do it on the FT as well, like the 3 things you need to know about the new Tesco chairman, and the clicks go through the roof, because it's and I think you've done one quite recently on, well, you do one every week on like the 23 things that you can do in Hackney this weekend. It's actually normally 25, but I think we're a bit short that week. So, you could put that's
25 things to do in Hackney. Oh my God.
Well, you can do it next week if you want, Amanda.
Yeah, they're the legal ones.
Any lists are always popular. I think people like knowing that they're not going to click through and be confronted with big blocks of text. And
Well, another format that is very popular on the FT is what our economics editor calls the charticle, which is basically telling a story through charts. He did a very good one a while ago on like the US economy, looking at bond yields and job rates, and you've got very little actual writing, just big charts and data, and they do very well on social media, get lots of shares. People think they're very clever. Is there anything that you've actually stopped doing because you can see that online the reader statistics show that it's dead as a dodo? For us, it's kind of company results that aren't very interesting. We've stopped doing those.
International stories, weirdly, for Retail Week.
Really?
So we get reader feedback saying we want to hear more about Walmart and Carrefour and all these companies and what they're doing. And if you look at the stats, those stories are always right at the bottom. So we get told face to face, but the stats don't show it and the stats don't lie.
And how about with the Dawsoness? Is there anything that you've stopped doing or are less likely to do?
When we started out, we were doing a daily roundup of listings actually, and so we've adapted that to the 25 things that we mentioned just then. I think it's a case of looking at the amount of labour that's involved in producing a piece and sort of seeing, adapting it to how people want to digest it, and just found that a weekly roundup was a much more it gave a much more appropriate reward for the amount of time it took, rather than doing sort of daily ones.
Where they could just kind of disappear into the ether.
I think that's right, yeah. And being able to see the click-throughs that each article gets means that you can sort of test out different ways of doing things and see what works and mix it up. And I think you should be prepared to mix things up as often as you feel like it. I don't think readers necessarily going to look at the site and think, oh, everything's sort of changing all the time. I think, yeah.
I think they expect it to be changing online. It's like with magazines, they say, oh, don't change anything for 6 months if you take over, because the readers won't like it, and you have to research, what you're going to junk and what columnists you're going to sack. But
you've got a physical record, I suppose, and you can imagine someone could actually sit there and look through week by week, and if the format of the magazine changes every time, then it'd be a bit disconcerting. But online, I think you can just sort of change things up as often as you like.
And Paul, is there anything that you've kind of not done consciously?
There's definitely things we've not done consciously. We had the remit is its news. So whereas we would do features, I love doing features, but it has to be based on something that's happened that day or is going to happen that week, or that's the thinking behind it.
Or someone who's never done an interview before, who would attract attention.
Yeah, I mean, we'll do lots of. First of all, we will do lots and lots of stories in a day, but we'll just sort of prioritise. We've got an audience of people who are reading it. Part of if they've done a deal or something and it's relatively interesting, there's no reason not to do it just because it's not a mega news story. We've set out to be kind of somewhere where our readers think they'll get a good showing as well. But and of course stories like that don't take a lot of time to put out, and they just sort of take a bit of the extraneous stuff out there. But you can, actually online you can include quite a lot of information that would never see the light of day in a magazine without too much work. But so within that remit, one thing we've never done that people often say to us is, I would probably point out the biggest one, is a features list that goes out and says, in 6 months' time we're going to be writing about sheds in Wales. And there's no reason not to do that. Works brilliantly well on magazines, but there's absolutely no reason for us to do that. Certainly people don't want us to do it, or in a real sense. They want us to do it in a sense of, why haven't you got a features list? But I can't see how that would be helpful.
And do you send reporters out into the regions to get regional news,
or
or
what's
do you do it all
happened
from
is
London?
we've got our head office is in Glasgow, and there's 150 people there compiling all of the data and that, or more, the real business. On each of the desks, there's someone with now in the last kind of 6 months, we've had someone who has a news remit. So a certain percentage of their week is trying to follow up news stories in Birmingham, Manchester, Scotland. I think there's over 10 people now doing it. And there's sort of a number of benefits to that. But the main one really is it just has someone within the kind of data collection side of things thinking like a journalist. And that's extremely important if you want to have that someone spotting outliers, and that rent could never be that. And also it makes the conversation that they're having with people as they're compiling data more interesting, because
it's kind of interesting that it's providing a new route into journalism, heads up graduates in the room.
It is, yeah.
But also slightly depressing because he's probably quite cheap in terms of his journalistic output as a data cruncher. He's not actually a qualified hack.
Yeah, you may say that. I mean, I think that less and less people are coming into journalism we can have a wider debate about how difficult it is for people to become journalists these days. I think it's becoming increasingly hard for people unless they're from
the London area.
So
can afford to hothouse them while they work for free.
I'm not too convinced about that. As long as they're bright and are really keen on it, then this is a good chance to see if they've got a nose for it and like it, and make a decision that way. Yeah.
Good. Do we have any questions from the audience that you would like to ask any member of the panel or me about any of the issues raised thus far? Nick Duxbury, that chap with the beard, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks, Claire. You were talking about the challenge of making long-form features work online. I'd just be quite interested in hearing what everyone's trying to do that. Are you just going, well, we'll just make everything short, sharp, punchy and accessible, or are you trying to experiment and see what you can do? Things like medium and shorthand the snowfall stuff, New York Times has done lots of things that suggest that people are willing to read it if you get the format right. So I suppose I'm quite interested to see, especially, you know, like Dulcinist, I read it all the time, you know, in a coffee house or something. I probably don't necessarily read it online, so I'd be interested in what the stats show. You know, do people engage with it, the long form stuff online?
Who would like to go first? How about you, Mark?
Well, yeah, the answer is sort of no from our perspective. The long form stuff doesn't really work online. Luckily, both formats sort of support each other. You know, so the print mag supports itself through advertising, as does the online side of things. But if we didn't have the print mag, there's no way that we'd invest the time in writing, you know, a long form feature, because there's no way it would pay for itself through the advertising revenue. So yeah, from my point of view, I've just accepted that the two formats sort of lend themselves to different types of articles, and yeah, we sort of treat them, as I said before, quite separately.
No, I think that it can work. I mean, certainly my experiences at the FT show that it can. We've actually got a features club that we've set up now, that one of the Emma Jacobs, one of the Business Life writers, has set up, where she and others submit really good examples of long form journalism, which we all try and read every month, and then we meet up to discuss them. And there was an excellent one in the club last month, which was this New Yorker magazine piece that one of their correspondents, a long-time correspondent in Egypt, had written about the logistics of the rubbish collection system in Cairo, which is all really strictly controlled by caste, and you have different people who collect different things. It's not like a municipal waste system. There's no you know, like bin company who come and do it. It's all individuals. And it turned out being a story of how he got to know his bin collector and helped him with his divorce, and then he got back together with his wife, and then he was finding all of these pill packets in the rubbish of diplomats and stuff. It was almost like reading a novel, and I read the whole thing on my phone and missed my tube stop home because I was so absorbed in it. You know, and I haven't got like a big phone. I've just got a silly iPhone. So, and loads of other people said it was such a compelling narrative, and they didn't have pictures or bullet points or anything. It was just like a really, really good story, and it was massively shared and read because people really liked it. I mean, I wouldn't ever buy the New Yorker magazine, but now I follow them on Facebook, and I kind of look for other similar things.
Yeah, I should say that I do think long form does work online, just doesn't work for us. I think if you follow the New Yorker on Facebook, you are following it because you know they do great long journalism. I think most of our social media subscribers come to it because they're used to the short, punchy news stories, and they pick up the magazine because they want something to sort of sit and read when they're in the pub or a bar or something. So they come to the two formats with sort of different ideas of what they're going to get.
How long can you run to on Resale Week?
We're experimenting with stuff at the moment. So we've invested in a slightly different CMS system in order to do this, and we've tested it on commercial projects. So Microsoft sponsors a report which is like, I don't know, 4,000 words long, and it's designed for mobile, which is quite interesting. So that's a big report, but it's got video in it and images and graphs and infographics. So it's not really designed to read it all in one go necessarily, but it is designed to be, you know, the user experience on the mobile's excellent compared to other stuff that we have, and that's a big report. But in terms of our what we do daily, so like Paul, we'll have our daily news meeting, decide which analysis we're going to do today on these big stories. One that did really well recently, to Amanda's point, 7 ways, blah, blah, blah. The last one we did was on the back of Mike Coop being sentenced, the boss of Sainsbury's, I don't know if you saw it, front page of the Times, to 2
Deirdre
years
Hitwell, former IBP multiple award winner.
There you go.
Her scoop.
It was a brilliant story. 2 years in jail he was sentenced to in Egypt. So we decided on that day, and had it up by about midday, 7 disastrous forays into overseas retail, and it went crazy. People loved it. So we had like pictures in there, and it was really short, each section, but it was long form. It wasn't a news story. It's probably about over 1,000 words altogether. So I think if you package it in certain ways, it's doable.
And many shares, I would have thought.
Yeah, lots of shares on Twitter, yeah.
Good. Do we have any other questions? Oh, lots. You were first, man at the back with a white t-shirt on.
Curious about when you guys get a first-time visitor, any tactics that are working quite well on getting them to become a repeat visitor? Maybe you're going for the email subscription, or I don't know what your next step is, maybe just another page view. Is there anything that's working quite well this year for any of you?
Okay, so the question was, how do you hold on to first-time visitors on your site? Do we have a volunteer to go first? Ours is we just charge them money to see anything. And I think that's probably Paul's as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We're positively welcoming, arms embraced. Please come on board, and you know. But no, there's no real. I mean, we're very fortunate that we started off with a sizable base of people who were subscribing because of the data product, you know, which is, as I say, so, and then it just built from there.
I think one thing I mentioned earlier, I didn't expand upon, is the kind of the homepage myth. And a lot of newspapers especially think, you know, all of the resource is directed at the homepage, how it's presented, have we got the right stories prominent enough, and the number of readers who are actually using the homepage as a front door to get on the website is just declining by the hour.
I think ours is at 10% or something at the moment.
Yeah, that's
50% newsletters. But it's a really good point you bring up, because in our business, retention rates, so keeping people on board, is as important, if not more important, than new customers at the moment. That's the figure we're trying to work on. And for us, it's about flagging with them all this amazing stuff, we would say amazing, stuff that we do online that they perhaps don't know about, and just making sure that they know we're the #1 place to go. So that's, you know, emails daily, maybe more than daily if it suits your business, without antagonising them too much by flooding their inbox. And just speaking to them, like we do customer groups, and find out what they like about it, what they don't. Because it's really important to keep those new customers coming back. Readers, sorry, I should say.
And
I've got all corporate now. I used to be a proper news hack.
content consumers. Mark?
Yeah, I've been really focusing on newsletter sign up actually. Claire, you mentioned before that,
Yes.
well, we can see that far fewer people are now being presented the stories on Facebook. Twitter's slightly different, but yeah, Facebook sort of dropped off, and we realised that we were focusing quite a lot on one medium. So now actually at the end of every story, try and put a link to newsletter sign up to really drive that. And I think when we don't have the volume of stories that you know, warrant sending a daily one, but a weekly one, when you present your subscribers with all the great content that you put up that week, you know, we get really good engagement through that. And so actually just going straight to them and not relying on another medium who may decide not to show your subscribers the content. Yeah, just going direct is.
Well, I think
this really well.
this is the new kind of carve up between news and features, isn't it? Like the instant news alert that goes out, and then the weekly roundup of stuff that's happened that you can click on and digest at your leisure. Claire, you had your hand up.
To Nicola and Mark, really. Where do you see the role of your magazines going? What do you think that the
Saving trees.
Oh, that's a big question. So I think I said before, only 60% of our subscriber base engage with us digitally. That means at least once a month. So it's not even a very, you know, tough metric to meet. 60. So that's 40% of our subscriber base read the magazine, come to our events, but don't go online. And that's quite a big chunk of people.
And this is an industry that sells online.
Yeah,
you know,
I know. Well,
£1 in every 8.
And we were chatting
online.
before, there's huge pressure on Retail Week for its apps to look really slick, for the online offer to be amazing, because our readers are leaders in e-commerce and online and, you know, sexy apps, you know, ASOS to Amazon. Yet 40% only read the magazine.
So you keep going with the magazine?
We'll keep going with the magazine, but it's changing. So 3 years ago, we'd have this wow front page every week, blockbuster news story that we were famous for, and we'd save it and keep it for the front page of the mag. Of course, today, you get it and 5 minutes later it's online. and the front page becomes more analytical. And we still have a newsy front page, but who knows, this time next year we might not have a newsy front page.
Might become more thematic.
Yeah, it might be a nice picture or something, or flagging up a feature on the inside, because increasingly it's looking a bit old when we go to press on a Wednesday night and we come out on a Friday. And we've already, perhaps broken the story on a Tuesday evening.
Richard, you're next. Are there any other questions before okay, we'll do one more at the end. Richard first.
How much opportunity is there for outsiders to contribute video? What do you tend to commission yourselves?
We commissioned the vast majority. We've just hired our first video journalist, first in EMAP, to do that. Woo! And he's brilliant. And he's only been with us about a month or two.
Give me his name.
No way. But we do accept third-party videos, but they can't be they can't be PR at all, and they have to be interesting. So, the boss of Tesco, when he announced a £6 billion loss that morning, the retailers have got a bit more savvy about it now as well. So they'll post video clips of the chief exec being interviewed or just talking to the camera. And so, we'll get the link off the retailer. They don't mind us having it, and that's really good content for us. So we do accept third party, but a lot more we're doing it on our own now.
But it's not worth submitting it speculatively.
It's worth giving me a call or speaking to me after and giving me your idea.
But it's interesting how the really big companies are seeing, well, why should I go on CNBC and be interviewed by a potentially hostile interviewer when I can do this video clip and explain it, and people can just take it on their websites. I mean, we often listen to the Today programme, the big interview at 8:10, because that will typically generate a news story for the FT first thing in the morning if it's a bit quiet and there's not much else going on. And that's why the BBC sticks to that time of doing it, because they know that they can have their programme referenced in lots and lots of online stories, whereas often it will take the BBC themselves about 2 hours before they get their online story about the Today programme interview up online, which never fails to amuse me. Any more takers on the video content, or should we move to the last? The lady at the back in the white shirt.
Yeah, there was an article on PR Week recently about how journalists are using Twitter a lot more to get their stories, so actually getting the content, putting out requests, that kind of thing, and the PRs weren't really on the same wavelength. I just wanted to know how much you guys found that to be true, and if you thought that Twitter was sort of the new channel as opposed to email that you go out and find your stories.
Not me personally. I mean, I have a problem with Twitter in the sense that if I don't follow you and you send me you mention me in a tweet, I won't get any kind of alert on my phone that I've got an mention. Whereas somebody who I am following and I follow back, if they mention me, then like if Matthew did it, then I'd get an alert. So often I'll have a journalist who will do that, and I won't see it for a week because I won't realise that there's actually a message there waiting for me. So I just think with Twitter, you're kind of, well, the way I use it is it's kind of like a monitoring system of what's breaking rather than what might be a good scoop to do.
Yeah,
a
I
future
completely
point.
agree. Actually, I've been in the same situation when PRs have tried to alert me to some story, and I've just not seen it for some reason. And it probably is better in terms of press releases to just pick up the phone, to be honest. I miss emails as well. I get thousands in a week, so it's tricky. I'd suggest picking up the phone. Some people are better on Twitter though, like my editor George. If you tweeted him, he'd probably pick it up faster than he would the phone.
He's always on Twitter.
Yeah, he is. So I guess it depends who the journalist is.
So you can like hashtag journal request and it'll like go out into the world open. People can just respond to that. I don't know if that was being actually being used as much as PR Week sort of made it seem. It seemed like journalists were using it all the time. PRs were sort of behind the times, so I wasn't sure if that was true.
I mean, I don't know about anyone else.
I've never used the hashtag journo requests. I mean, I suppose I might if I was looking for a case study for something, and I think that's something where PRs really come into their own. And you can say, can anyone put me in touch with someone who's been, ripped off by Wonga, or something like that was a recent one where we wanted to get people who, or not ripped off by, who'd been refunded by and had a large sum of money repaid to them because it was so kind of extraordinary that they were wiping off all of these nightmare debts. So there are instances when you can use Twitter for crowdsourcing for news stories. But I mean, I would echo what Nicholas said about email as well. I mean, you just get so many emails. I mean, unless we were talking about journalists being able to sell your story in a tweet. If you're a PR person, I think the challenge is being able to sell your story in a subject heading, because sometimes when I'm in a favourable mood, I might email somebody back and say, I would never, ever in a million years have done a story on this, but because I don't even know why I opened your email, but I did, and there was actually quite a good story lurking in there, but you would never know it from the subject line, because often that's the only thing. We won't even open the email, we'll just see the subject line, and if you make it too long, we can't see the end of it. That's the other thing. Sometimes people send these essays in the subject line. You can only see the first 10 words, and it gets chopped off.
I think that's right. I think there's nothing worse than opening an email or something, starting to read it and just thinking, I don't know what this is. And so if you know that you've got to sell it in a sentence, you're immediately looking at it thinking, what is that sentence going to be? And if someone's put it in the subject heading, then yeah, it's going to be opened.
Or you could take the Andy Teacher approach to PR and say, got a story, ring me. But that only works for certain people. Amanda, do you have any stern words about emails?
Emails or Twitter? I mean, I think Twitter's a sort of fantastic tool for journalists. I think, as more and more people now tweet, I mean, everybody has a Twitter account, it's your feed just becomes clogged up, and you just run through them so quickly that unless, as you were saying, you've got a picture, a fantastic headline. I mean, I would never, ever post the headline of a story that I'd written, or something where I was trying to get attention, from the copy or the headline in the story that was actually I wanted people to read. I'd always rewrite it for Twitter. So even if I'm reposting something by another journalist, I mean, the FT being a classic one, so I tweet quite a lot of FT stories, but I never use their headline, I write my own.
Yeah,
because
really boring.
I want to attract my audience, and so somewhere in the story will be something that's very attractive to architects, but it will be in the 4th or 5th paragraph. So I just read. So I think that Twitter needs you can use Twitter just any old way, retweet and not take much care. But if you really want to get people's attention, you have to really think about what you're doing.
You've got to personalise.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much, lovely panel. Gerald Bowie, I believe, wants to take the stage and say a few words. Yes, and thank you, Sir Edelman. Well done.